Hi there. Actually, there are some times when some things I share, I think, should I have saved that for a Sunday morning? Keep my best stuff for later. But probably this one is one of those times when I think I really, I find this kind of stuff, the stuff I'm about to share, interesting. But I do wonder whether most people would find it valuable. And why share on YouTube? Well, look, you're on YouTube. You can turn it off if you don't like it. If you want to go somewhere else and do something else, that's fine. I find these times occasions for me to think, to express thoughts that I've been pondering, and with the thought that maybe others will find it helpful. And if they find it, it's because they needed to find it because they're looking for ways to explain things that they've been grappling with themselves. And when I preach on Sunday, it's a captive audience, I don't really want to abuse that privilege. So this is one of those occasions when it's an idea that I've been rattling around in my mind for probably some years, and I wouldn't say it's fully formed, but it's something that's been, as I've been talking about, maturity and stages of faith. This is one of those examples, illustrations that I think kind of gets at some of what I'm trying to say and just comes at it from a different angle, though. So it starts with this idea that, as Scripture says, God has revealed Himself to us through nature. It's kind of like the first scriptures, nature itself. And Paul kind of reaffirms that later on in Acts when he sort of speaks to the Athenians and says something similar. God has spoken to us in many ways, and creation is definitely one of those ones, and probably the first one. And what we see in nature actually is this principle of beginning with simple things that grow ever increasingly complex. Our created world has a sort of a simple foundation to it that rises in ever increasing complexity to its pinnacle, or to a pinnacle at least so far, which would be us. So how do I mean? So we are part of what's called a solar system, because at the center of our reality is the sun. The sun makes up 99% of the mass in the solar system, so it's the deal. But it's a very simple thing. The sun is made up of hydrogen, the simplest element known, one electron and one proton, and it has been, by force of gravity, which is again the most simple, pervasive, fundamental force known, has dragged these hydrogen atoms together and squeezed them together until nuclear fusion has broken out. And so that's why it's burning. It's releasing all of this energy. So it's just a simple, massive nuclear reaction, hydrogen smashing together, creating and releasing energy. So that's the start of our life food chain. Now this energy hits the planet, and what does it do? Well, without it, this would be a dead, cold, frigid world. There would be no seas. It would just be frozen, ice and rock. But because of the sun, because of its heat, it warms those seas so that there is a medium in which fish can swim and plants and things can live. That medium of water also then evaporates, creating clouds. And there are thermal updrafts because the sun's warmth continues to rise and allows this expanded air to rise higher than cooler air, which is dense and pushes down. So it creates this turbulence in the atmosphere. And that pushes this vapor onto the land, which, if it didn't have that, it wouldn't be able to be watered properly. Yeah, we have rivers and lakes for sure, but it's the falling of that rain, that water that's come from the seas or from the lakes and rivers onto otherwise dry land that allows things to grow on land. So without the sun, we wouldn't have a sea that was liquid and allow things to live in. We wouldn't have rain, which would allow things to grow on land either. And that's a fairly complex process. Weather systems, we're still grappling with how to predict weather systems. Anyway, water comes onto land, and the land itself has been warmed also by the sun. So warm soil and rain leads to germination of seeds and plants. Now, plants themselves have their own way of growing, their own way of taking sunlight and making use of it. And it's an even more complex thing than perhaps the weather systems. It's certainly different anyway. Photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is using sunlight, sun energy, and to convert, it's a chemical process to convert carbon dioxide and water and other minerals into building blocks for the plant to grow. So it takes the sunlight, brings in carbon dioxide and water, and keeps growing. Really complex. Then animals come along. Now, they don't photosynthesize. They eat the plants. The energy has been stored in the plants, and the animals eat those plants, get the energy from that, and have an even more complex system involved, the digestive tract, which has this biome of organisms and bugs and microbes. I mean, there's more stuff living in us. We cannot count the numbers of things that we host, which give us the ability to break down this vegetation and pull out of it and extract out of it the energy that we need in the way that we need it, so that we can now become the beings that we are. And animals are far more complex creatures or expressions of life than even plants. We now have, there's blood and there's bones and there's brains and there's eyeballs and eyelashes and, skin and spit, and, we are just so much more of an order of complexity compared to a plant. And this is the process, right? We start with the beginning of a very, very simple thing, this sun at the beginning and the center of our universe or of our solar system, and its energy bathes our planet and with all that we need, in a sense, to sustain life on planet Earth. And as that energy is taken up by more and more complex things, the nature itself on planet Earth becomes increasingly complex to the pinnacle, as I said, of humans, where we are nature itself, or sunlight itself, looking back on ourselves and looking back on itself and saying, we exist. So from simple to ever-increasing complexity, that's kind of the order of things within nature. But then there's a order of simplicity that comes at the end of that, where we look at the world and go, well, it's vastly complex, and yet it's also really simple. I mean, you plant a seed and it will grow. It has achieved a maturity so that everything is stable and predictable and faithful. You don't need to understand the complexity of how plants grow and how your gut works to take what is in a plant or what is from other nutrient sources to make you well. You just have to do it, and you don't even have to think about, do I need to eat? Hunger does it for you. We have an incredibly, incredibly complex world, and yet living in it is really simple. It's really straightforward. There's such stable and predictable conditions that have been achieved over a long period of time, so that it's easy for all things to live on planet Earth. Now, setting aside the issue, of course, of how humans have impacted that world, I think you can see what I'm saying, that there is a deep simplicity that drives and has been, the essential source of life on planet Earth, the sun, which has gone through ever-increasing stages of complexity to achieve a beautiful harmony that you would call simplicity again. It's simple to live in this world. It's natural and harmonious, and that's what we achieve. The true maturing of a complex system is when it becomes simple and whole again, instead of difficult and hard to imagine and hard to work out and constantly having to read the manual. You don't have to read the manual to live on planet Earth. It's just so well constructed. Now, behind all of that, of course, is God. It's not that the sun is God, though the sun works as a fairly good metaphor or analogy for God, because God too is very, very simple. God can be summed up as, and is summed up in the scriptures as, God is love. God is loving relationship. God is a being that exists in love and community, Trinity being before all creation, and out of that Trinity being created as an expression of his own being, or God's own being, for the simple purpose of to have more things to love, to be in community and in relationship with all that it creates. So that's a fairly simple motivation, in the same way that the sun is a very simple thing, and brings life to all things, so is God. Very simple, but bringing all things to life out of that simplicity. Now, that doesn't mean that we think of God as simplistic. We tend to think of God as being complex, or at least struggle to comprehend God for kind of two main reasons. One would be, of course, that we are created beings and He is the creator. He is another order of existence beyond us. And it says in Scripture again, God is spirit. And we have a spirit, but we are natural beings as well. We are fleshly created beings. So we can communicate and be in relationship with God because of our spirit connection. But God is spirit and different to us, another order of being to us. The other reason, though, and the one I want to kind of pick out a little bit more here, is God is simple and we're not. And that is that's a detriment to us. That is what's the word? There's a word I really want to say, but I can't think of it. It's not falling to my tongue. It's an indictment on us. We are not simple. We are complicated. More to the point, we are confused. We are divided. We have many things in our hearts that we want, many desires pulling at us, tormenting us, haunting us, most of which we don't even know are happening to us. We are not simple like God. We are divided. Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure of heart, for they will see God." God is pure. He is about one thing. He is love and loving relationships. And we're not. We have many desires. What does it say in John? There is a reason why you're in conflict and why you are not like God. It's because of the many desires of your heart. We are divided by our desires of heart. That means our heart is not pure. For that reason, we do not see God. God is obscure to us, not just because He's spirit, though that's definitely part of it, but also because our hearts are not pure. Now, where does that track back to? Well, it tracks back to the very beginning of the book. In the beginning, God created all things, made Adam and Eve, made a garden, said, here's a tree, the knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat it. So what do? We go and eat it, right? And what does Scripture say? It says that our hearts were darkened and our eyes were opened. So we became really bright. We became really intelligent. We were able to work out via knowledge what was good and what was evil. But we had both knowledges, right? Our hearts were not pure anymore. They were divided between what is good and what is evil. And out of that, we have become certainly very creative. We are still the image bearers of God, very creative. And we too bring into the world increasing orders of complexity through our technologies. I am speaking to you through some really complex systems here. I don't understand a tenth of this or 1% of what's going on. When I speak into this camera and then upload this to YouTube, I have no idea what I'm doing. But our technologies are as divided as we are. They are bringing good things and evil things. When we create drugs, some of those drugs go on to heal and some of them go on to harm. When we create technologies like these, we create to help people communicate, and yet find that people who use these systems too much feel lonelier than ever. And there is a correlation being drawn between the appearance and rise of smartphones and the increase of anxiety and feeling lonely and disconnected among young people for whom smartphones are kind of like their life. It's like what they've been raised with. So there are so all that we create is always as divided as our own hearts, because of course our creations mirror the Creator, and we are divided. We are divided in our motivations, divided in our being, in our inner being. And growing up actually is about becoming more pure. And that's not a moral condition necessarily, not particularly. When I say, and when Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God," He wasn't saying, blessed are people who have never faltered, who have no sin, who have a perfect record morally. He's saying, blessed are those who have a pure focus to their life. In the same way that God has this pure focus, He is love. That is His simplicity, and that is what He's drawing us into as well. Blessed are those who love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, for they will see God. And of course, that's why we don't see God. we are divided. We have many other things tugging on us. But the maturity journey is to grow in love, to grow. I mentioned this guy last week as well, Ronald Rolheiser, and he describes the faith stages in a lot, sort of a more simplified version. He says the first stage of life is to get our life together, and that's the idea of when we leave home, our objective really is to find a partner to spend the rest of our life with, to create a home like the home that we came from, that we were, birthed from and into. Have a family, have a home, get the keys to the car, keys to the house, keys to the business, keys to the community centre, and that kind of represents getting our life together. And then the second stage of life is learning to give your life away. And the idea there is, okay, so you've got everything, you've pulled everything together to yourself, you've got all these wonderful things. To become better, you now need to learn to give yourself more to those things. You become a better husband, or better wife or better spouse, not by getting them to you, but then giving yourself to them. Learning to be more gracious, more giving, more forgiving, more generous, giving them more space to become more them, giving yourself to them. Same with your children. We become better parents the more we love them unselfishly. And we become better in communities when we learn to give ourselves more freely to that community and more generously. And so there's a refining there in that process, a purity of heart that comes through that process as we give ourselves more and more away, and learn to do that more graciously and with more sweetness to our spirit. And I think that's what it's about. So in the end, what we end up with, the true maturity, if you like, is someone who is like God in having a purity of motive and wanting to be in love and loving relationships with others and to do their part in that process as much as it's up to them to do it. To have fewer and fewer things dividing their heart and drawing them away from that purity of motive and that purity of desire. And as you can imagine, and I'm sure this is already occurring to you, that sounds hard to do, and it really is. It really is. Final thought, though, on this simplicity at that end of the scale, when it's a mature system, when it's stable and faithful and reliable in the way that we think of when we think of mature people, has also the great subtleties and wisdoms that come with that. And though there is a simple and singular desire to bring love wherever they go, they have with that, therefore, many ways of doing that. They recognize that love needs to be applied with wisdom and subtlety, that to love someone, depending on where they are, requires different approaches. And the same as with God. He seems complex to many, and the scriptures are extremely complex because what we're dealing with is a being who is singularly focused on bringing us all into loving relationship with each other and him, or God, yet having to do so with all of us in all of our stages and all of our developments, and having to treat us according to our own particular needs and bringing us toward him in that journey. And that requires an incredible amount of wisdom and application that someone who is only simplistic simply cannot do. Simplicity. What's the word there? When we're simplistic, that's when we have swift judgments. We have black and white rules. It's the religious approach where we just need rules to live by rather than love, because love strips away rules and requires more wisdom. And rules is simpler in a sense because we just have to do X, Y, and Z and we know we're going to be okay. But unfortunately, that doesn't lead to love and that doesn't lead to maturity. So these are my thoughts. I don't know whether that would have ever scanned on a Sunday morning, but I hope that was in some ways interesting and maybe even a little enlightening. God bless you. I've been Philip. You've been you. See you next time.